Today we examine a game that the world champion Alexander Alekhine considered one of his best positional achievements. Indeed, he manages to transform a seemingly boring and equal game into a strategic masterpiece. And he does it thanks to a seemingly innocent defensive move. This quiet move, however, changes the entire course of the game and has a butterfly effect, setting off a chain of sophisticated maneuvers that completely paralyze the enemy army. So let's dive in and see if you can find Alekhine's deep strategic ideas too. Alekhine starts with d4 and his opponent, Ruben Fine, replies with d5, after which Alekhine plays the queen's gambit and Fine accepts the gambit, d takes c. Before getting the pawn back, white usually plays knight f3, taking the e5 square under control and preventing the possible e5 advance, which might give black some activity. And only after knight f6, white starts thinking about getting the pawn back, usually by playing e3, followed by bishop takes c4. But in our game, Alekhine plays queen a4 check instead. He's going to recapture the pawn with the queen. Of course, black would have played knight c6 or pawn c6, after which the position would remain more or less equal. But instead, Fine plays queen d7, which is also perfectly playable. The idea is to exchange the queens and transition into the endgame, because after queen takes c4, black plays queen c6, and it turns out that white cannot avoid the exchange of the queens. If the white queen moves away, black can capture the unguarded bishop on c1. Alekhine doesn't capture on c6 himself, because that would let black capture with the knight, developing this piece, so instead he defends his queen with knight a3. And it turns out that the black queen is actually badly placed on c6 because she's blocking the c-pawn, so black cannot push the pawn forward in order to challenge white's domination of the center. Neither can black develop his knight on c6 because of the black queen. Neither can he play knight d7, because in this case white would capture on c6 and black would be forced to recapture with the pawn and his pawn structure would be demolished. So the best thing black can do is to exchange the queens, so he captures on c4. But this of course lets white capture with the knight and activate this piece. Black plays e6, opening the bishop's diagonal, and we have reached our first critical position. So it's exactly in this position that Alekhine makes the move that has a butterfly effect. And a small tip for you: this innocent looking move creates a serious positional threat and provokes black to weaken his position. So you can pause the video and try to find it. So as we can see, white has a space advantage. Mainly thanks to this strong central pawn, which controls the important squares. As you can see, the white army occupies the first 4 ranks, while the black army is cramped on the first 3 ranks. So, in order to liberate himself, black should strike in the center. e5 he would love to play, but it's impossible because white has the total control over this important square. So the only thing to challenge white's domination of the center black can do is the c5 advance. And Alekhine, so this move, which looks pretty innocent, is a3. But on the one hand, of course, this move prevents bishop b4 check, which would have led to further simplifications of the position, but that's not the main idea of this move. It actually creates a serious threat of b4, after which white would get the total control over the c5 square and black will never be able to push this pawn forward, and he will remain squeezed and cramped probably until the end of the game. So if black wants to play c5 and liberate himself, he must do it right away, while the white pawn is still on b2. So that's why Fine plays c5. But that's exactly what Alekhine wanted. After c5, the d6 square is weakened now. On c7, the black pawn controlled this square, and now it doesn't. The knight is attacking this square, and Alekhine plays bishop f4, attacking this square for the second time, and it turns out that the white knight will invade with a check, black will be forced to exchange the bishop, and white will get the advantage of 2 bishops. Fine plays knight c6, developing the knight and attacking the pawn for the second time. That's why knight d6 check doesn't work. White will lose the pawn in this case. So Alekhine gives up the central pawn, but it's a very strong move. D takes c. So let's see why it's so strong. After bishop takes c5, again knight d6 check would be a serious mistake, because black isn't forced to capture the knight. Instead, as the black bishop has moved away from f8, black can play king e7 without closing the bishop's diagonal and attack the knight for the second time. So instead of knight d6 check right away, b4 follows. With a tempo, the black bishop must move away, and again Alekhine doesn't hurry with knight d6 check. As Max Uwe, who also annotated this game in his book called Meet the Masters, writes, Alekhine extracts every ounce of advantage from the position. So before invading the d6 square, he pushes the pawn forward, again with a tempo, kicking out the knight, and the knight doesn't have any good squares to move, so it must retreat. It retreats to its initial square, and only then Alekhine invades and gets the advantage of 2 bishops. After which, Fine plays knight e4, centralizing his knight with a tempo, attacking the bishop, and we have reached another critical position. So where should the white bishop move? You can pause the video and try to find the best square. So, of course, if the bishop retreats to, let's say, g3, black would be glad to exchange his knight for the bishop, and white would lose the advantage of 2 bishops. If it moves to b4, which looks natural, the bishop still cuts the black king on this diagonal, preventing him from castling kingside. Black has a strong move, a5, attacking the bishop, and again, if the bishop moves, let's say to d2, black will get a chance to exchange and white will lose the advantage of 2 bishops. And if, to avoid this, white captures en passant, then knight takes a6 follows, again attacking the bishop. So the only square the bishop has is a5, but in this case black plays knight c5, activating his knight with a tempo, attacking the bishop, and the best thing white can do is bishop b4, and black can repeat the position with knight a6, bishop a5, knight c5, and the game might end in a draw, because if instead of bishop b4 the bishop moves to b6, that would be in black's favor. Black can even get an advantage after knight b3, attacking the rook. It turns out that the a3 pawn will fall next move, because rook a2 doesn't work. After knight c3, the rook will be forced to move away from the a file anyways, and the pawn will fall. And rook c2, attacking the knight, doesn't help, because black would still capture, and it turns out that the knight is untouchable because of the checkmate on the first rank. So, knight b4, natural knight b4 doesn't work. What if, bishop b4 doesn't work. But what if bishop f4? In this case, f6 is possible, followed by e5 with a tempo, after which black will have a strong pawn on e5, and the bishop's diagonal would also open, and black would solve all his problems. For this reason, instead of these natural moves, Alekhine moves his bishop to c7, which looks a little bit unnatural, but it's the best square for the bishop. Fine plays knight d7, and we have reached another critical position. So, at the moment, white's position looks better, but black has many active ideas, such as knight c5, for example, getting a great knight, which will also support the strong e4 knight. Besides that, black can play b6, followed by bishop b7, activating his bishop. So on the long diagonal, the bishop will be greatly placed. Besides that, black still can play f6 and e5. So Alekhine, however, finds the only way of retaining and even increasing his slight advantage. and you can pause the video and try to find it too. So, white still hasn't developed his king side, and it would be natural to play e3, let's say, opening the bishop's diagonal with the idea of bishop d3. But in this case, black can play b6, preparing bishop b7, and after possible bishop d3, black plays knight c5, defending his knight with a tempo, attacking the bishop. So if white captures, of course, black will recapture, and white is losing his advantage of 2 bishops, his only advantage. And if the bishop retreats, black can even get a slight advantage. After bishop b7, it turns out that all black pieces are greatly placed, and the great black knights aren't weaker than the white bishops. Maybe the knights are even stronger than the enemy bishops. So the natural move e3 doesn't work. Alekhine makes another move that looks unnatural. Instead of developing his king side, he moves the already developed knight d4, with the idea of vacating the f3 square for the pawn. So he's going to play f3, kicking out the active centralized knight, followed by e4, and again he will dominate the center. His pawn on e4 will control the very important squares. So Fine, in his turn, tries to fight for the initiative. While white still hasn't played f3 and e4, and the white pawn doesn't control the d5 square, he wants to centralize his knight with a tempo. So he plays knight b6 with the idea of knight d5 with a tempo. And that's exactly what he does. After f3, instead of retreating the attacked knight, he invades the d5 square, attacking the bishop. So where should the bishop move? If it moves to the natural square e5, then f6 is possible, and after possible f takes e, f takes, e takes, e takes, the position is absolutely equal. White has lost his advantage. Probably even black is slightly better. For this reason, the bishop retreats to a5. And now the knight is under attack. White is threatening to capture it, so fine retreats to f6. And we have reached another critical position. So what should white do next? You can pause the video and try to find Alekhine's counterintuitive idea. So he played f3 in order to play e4, but if he plays e4 right away, the black knight can invade the e3 square, eyeing the bishop, and the bishop cannot move because the g2 pawn would fall. Besides that, black threatens e5, kicking out the knight, which controls the c2 square, after which the black knight would invade with a fork. For this reason, before playing e4, Alekhine, and here comes the counterintuitive idea, his knight is greatly placed on d4, but he retreats the knight. Knight c2, taking the e3 square under control, and only next move he will push the pawn to e4. Bishop d7 follows, developing the bishop, attacking the pawn, but now e4, and the black knight cannot invade e3 anymore. But fine keeps fighting for the initiative. Instead of retreating the knight, again he makes an in-between move, rook c8, developing the rook with a tempo, attacking the knight. Alekhine defends the knight, king d2, and it isn't dangerous for white to move his king to this square to the center, because the queens have been exchanged and the black pieces are too passive to create threats to the enemy king. And now I will ask you to find black's strongest move. So what should black do? His knight on d5 is under attack. You can pause the video and try to find the computer move, the move that both Alekhine and Uwe missed in their annotations, but that's black's strongest move. So, while the knight is still on d5 and controls the important squares, instead of retreating the knight, black should have played b6, attacking the bishop. Now, if the bishop moves, black would simply exchange, and white loses his advantage of 2 bishops. And for this reason, white should capture the knight, and after b takes a, it's true, black has doubled pawns, but after d takes e and bishop takes e6, at least black has solved his main problem, so he isn't cramped anymore, his pieces have got some activity. White doesn't have the advantage of 2 bishops anymore, so the only problem black has is his doubled pawns, and white has only a slight advantage. But this move, b6, wasn't easy to notice. Instead, Fine makes a human move. So the knight is under attack, so he retreats the knight to b6, also creating a threat of knight c4 check with a fork, after which white would be forced to exchange his bishop for the knight, and again white loses the advantage of 2 bishops. So to prevent this, to prevent knight c4 check, Alekhine plays knight e3. So the maneuvers of this knight are very beautiful. First, the knight from f3 jumped on d4 to prepare f3 and e4 advance. Then it retreated to c2 to prevent the black knight from moving on e3. And now the knight returns to moves to e3 to the active square, where it controls the c4 square and prevents the black knight from jumping on c4. So white next move, white might play bishop b4, taking this diagonal under control and preventing black from castling. So for this reason, Fine castles kingside. And we have reached another critical position. So what next? How should white squeeze black even more? So black pieces are restricted. As you see, this knight doesn't have any good squares to move. The bishop is restricted by the white b5 pawn and by its own pawn on e6. And the second knight doesn't have good squares, neither d5 nor c4, which is controlled by the white pieces. The only chance to get some activity black has is knight a4, followed by knight c5. So a4 is the only square the knight has, and let's say if white again makes the natural developing move, his kingside still isn't developed, let's say bishop d3, then knight a4 is possible, followed by knight c5 with a tempo, and white is still slightly better, but black gets some activity and he can fight for equality. So instead of this natural developing move, to prevent knight a4, Alekhine pushes the pawn forward, not only completely restricting the knight, but also creating a threat. He's going to move the bishop away and push the pawn forward to a5, after which the knight will be forced to retreat and will be even less active. And Uwe, in his book, draws attention to an interesting detail. He writes that white has only 2 developed pieces, as we can see, the bishop and the knight, while black has developed all his pieces. However, for Alekhine, qualitative development has always been more important than quantitative, as Uwe writes. Black pieces, although formally developed, are completely restricted and have no prospects, whereas white will finish his development in the most effective way within a few moves. So Fine develops the second rook with a tempo, creating an unpleasant x-ray and threatening bishop takes b5 with the discovered check. That's why only now, finally, Alekhine develops his kingside, bishop d3, closing the d file. So now white is going to exchange a pair of rooks, because the black rooks are quite strong and they put very unpleasant pressure. So after the exchange of a pair of rooks, black's pressure would be reduced, after which white is going to move the bishop away, push the a pawn forward, and black would be completely squeezed. So to prevent this, to get at least some activity, Fine plays e5, opening the bishop's diagonal, preparing bishop e6, but the e5 advance has a serious drawback. When the pawn was on e6, it controlled the important squares, and now the white knight will get a chance to invade these squares when the right time comes. So Alekhine develops the rook, and he is going to exchange a pair of rooks. Bishop e6 follows. Now if white plays bishop b4, preparing a5 advance, that would be premature because black would exchange the rooks and capture the pawn. For this reason, first Alekhine exchanges the rooks, a pair of rooks, after which black captures. There is no pressure on the d file anymore, and only now bishop b4, opening the pawn's way to a5 and also taking this diagonal under control and cutting the black king. In the endgame, the king belongs in the center, but now the black king won't be able to move towards the center. So the knight doesn't have any prospects on f6. As you see, all the squares it can jump are controlled by the white pawns. So fine place, knight e8. a5 of course follows. And what now? If the knight jumps on c4, which looks more active, in this case, after the exchange of the knights, white plays rook c1, attacking the bishop for the second time, pinning it. The only move to save the piece is bishop e6. In this case, the rooks would be exchanged. Bishop c5, attacking the a7 pawn. The only way to save the pawn is a6, and after b takes, the white king comes closer to the weak isolated a6 pawn, and this pawn will eventually fall, after which the a5 pawn will turn into a passed pawn. For this reason, instead of the active knight c4 check, the knight must retreat to a passive square d7. However, the knight is eyeing the c5 square, and white could have prevented this by playing simply rook c1. But Alekhine plays more energetically. He invades the weakened d5 square, knight d5. And the knight, of course, is greatly placed. It's absolutely intolerable knight, and it's also threatening to invade e7 with a fork, so black must eliminate it. Bishop takes d5 follows, and after e takes d, it turns out that white gets a passed pawn. Black, however, plays knight c5. Not only eyeing the bishop, but creating a more serious threat. Knight b3 with a fork. Alekhine, however, finds a strong reply. He defends against the both threats. Bishop f5, saving the bishop with a tempo, attacking the rook. And knight b3 check doesn't work because after king d3, knight takes a1, bishop takes c8. It turns out that the pawn is under attack, and which is even more important, the white pawn is ready to move forward. For this reason, after bishop f5, although it seems that the rook is tied to the defense of the knight, fine finds a strong move, rook d8, leaving the knight unguarded, but attacking the d5 pawn. And it turns out that if white captures the knight, of course, black will capture the pawn with a check, and then he will get the piece back and he will win a pawn. So after rook d8, we have reached another critical position. Black actually has two threats. The first threat is knight b3, so he's still threatening this, winning the rook. And the second threat is rook takes d5, winning a pawn. And bishop takes c5, as I've just shown you, doesn't work. So what should white do? How should he defend against both threats? So king c3 follows, taking the b3 square under control, preventing knight b3. Also indirectly defending the pawn. It turns out that rook takes d5 is losing right away on the spot because of king c4. The rook is under attack, the knight is under attack, black is losing material. And also after king c3, it turns out that the black knight is still under attack, and now white is threatening to win a piece. So black must do something about it. If the knight retreats, and the only square it can retreat is d7, then white plays bishop e7, attacking the rook, and the rook is tied to the defense of the knight, so black is losing material. For this reason, the only move to save the knight is b6. Alekhine captures on b6, opening the a file for his rook, and we have reached another critical position. So what should white do next? How to increase the pressure? So one of the advantages of having two bishops is that when the right time comes, you can always exchange one of them. And this time has come. Alekhine exchanges his bishop for the great knight for black's best piece, and black is forced to capture with a pawn, and the b pawn turns into a passed pawn. So white has two passed pawns now. And Alekhine pushes the pawn right away, b6. So what should black do? If he plays rook b8 to attack and to stop the b pawn, then it turns out that black has back rank issues. So the king doesn't have the escape square. So white can play b7, and the threat is terrible threat is rook a8. And if black captures the pawn, then after rook a8, the knight is under attack, and after king f8, black wants to play king e7, unpinning his knight, but d6 preventing it, and there is nothing black can do about d7. For this reason, after b6, instead of rook b8, fine makes a much stronger move. Knight d6. The knight occupies the great blockading square, blockading the d5 pawn with a tempo, attacking the bishop, and also controls the b7 square to stop the b pawn. So we have reached another critical position. So of course white has a big advantage, but it's still not so easy to win. White must play precisely. So you can pause the video and try to find the fastest way to victory. So let's say, so the bishop of course is under attack. Let's say if white plays bishop g4, that would be a terrible mistake, because that would let black play f5 with a tempo, solving the back rank issues. And after the bishop retreats, so the bishop is out of play, and both pawns, passed pawns are blockaded, and the position is equal. White has lost his advantage. Or instead of bishop g4, another natural looking move is bishop d3, but that's also a mistake, because in this case the black king would move forward, again solving the back rank issues. There will be no checkmate anymore on the 8th rank. So if instead of king f8 black, let's say, played rook b8, then b7 would be possible, and the threat of course is rook a8, and black cannot capture with the rook for this reason, so he would be forced to capture with the knight, but in this case rook b1, pinning the knight, followed by bishop a6 is winning. But instead of rook b8, black can play, as I have already shown, king f8, solving the back rank issues, and after possible rook b1, rook b8, the position is equal again. The pawns are blockaded and stopped. So these natural moves, bishop g4 or bishop d3, don't work. Alekhine makes a beautiful move, bishop d7 instead, right under attack of the rook, but of course the rook cannot capture because of the checkmate. And the idea behind bishop d7 is to reroute the bishop to c6, on which it will control both important squares, b7 and a8, and after that, of course, white will play rook a8, b7, and win. For example, let's say black plays rook b8, trying to stop the pawn, but bishop c6 would follow. So black cannot capture because of checkmate, so he can play f6. Now he is ready to capture, but of course rook a8, pinning the rook, and after the exchange of the rooks, the pawn will move forward, and black would be forced to give up the knight, and white is winning. And there is nothing black can do about it. For this reason, fine captures the bishop, which of course means that he resigns, because that leads to checkmate. And now I recommend watching how a 14-year-old Alekhine found two fantastic checkmates in one game. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video, write comments and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.